An ancient text was literally erased during the Middle Ages, but as Wilson Walker shows us, new technology is revealing those hidden pages of history.
In 2023, high-resolution AI scans finally cracked open the microfractures of the Rosetta Stone, and what they found has absolutely terrified traditional historians. Using tools like Google's Fabricius, researchers realized the 196 BC decree wasn't a perfect translation at all, but a series of tailored lies and script tweaks designed by priests for psychological control. We're talking about mismatches and power grabs hidden in plain sight for 2,200 years. But how did French grunts stumble upon this game-changer back in 1799? Napoleon's stolen slab. In July 1799, the sun was absolutely baking a group of French soldiers at Fort Julien, right near the port town of Rashid. They weren't there on a grand archaeological mission. No, they were digging foundations to expand the fort. Suddenly, a shovel hit something much harder than packed dirt. It was this massive, jagged slab of dark granodiorite, often called basalt back then, and it weighed a staggering 762 kilograms. Most guys probably would have cursed it and tried to dig around it, but Captain Pierre-François Bouchard noticed something that literally changed the course of human history. The face of the stone was covered in 3 distinct bands of writing, and even in the grit and heat of a military trench, he realized they'd stumbled onto something far more valuable than a new wall. Here's the thing about that slab. It wasn't just old. It was a 196 BC decree issued by Ptolemy V, a boy king who was desperately trying to solidify his rule during a period of massive civil unrest. But the genius of the stone, and the reason it became a legend, was that the message was repeated in 3 different scripts. You had the formal high priest hieroglyphs at the top, which by the 18th century were basically a dead language that nobody on the planet could actually read.
Of course, the hieroglyphics, which was the language of the high priests and of royalty.
Below that was Demotic, which was the everyday cursive script of the Egyptian people. And at the bottom, there were 44 lines of ancient Greek. Because the scholars could read Greek, they realized they finally had a cheat sheet to unlock the secrets of the pharaohs that had been buried for 2,000 years. Now you'd think the French would have coasted to glory with this find, but history had other plans. The British actually seized the stone in 1801 after defeating Napoleon's forces, and it ended up in the British Museum as a prize of war.
The Rosetta Stone. Now Egyptians are calling on the British Museum to return part of their cultural heritage.
It's been there ever since, but the intellectual war to crack the code was just getting started. For over 20 years, the greatest minds in Europe stared at those symbols and failed miserably. Scholars were convinced that hieroglyphs were purely symbolic pictures, like some mystical secret code of ideas, rather than an actual phonetic language where symbols represented sounds. They were looking for deep cosmic truths when they should have been looking for an alphabet. Everything changed in 1822 when a brilliant, somewhat obsessive Frenchman named Jean-François Champollion had a breakthrough in Paris. Champollion was the kind of guy who had been obsessed with Egypt since he was a teenager, and he started looking at cartouches, those little oval loops that surround specific royal names. By matching the Greek name for Ptolemy to the symbols inside those loops, he realized that hieroglyphs actually functioned like letters. According to historical accounts from the British Museum, he was so overwhelmed when he finally connected the dots that he allegedly ran into his brother's office and shouted, "I've got it," and then literally fainted from the sheer exhaustion and shock of the revelation. That one moment of human genius unlocked over 100,000 ancient texts. Suddenly, we weren't just guessing what the pyramids were for. We were reading the diaries, the legal contracts, and the prayers of people who had been silent for millennia. It's one of those rare moments where a single object acts as a physical bridge across time. Think about that for a second. Have you ever held a piece of history in your hands, or even just seen an object that completely flipped everything you thought you knew about the world? For 2 centuries, we believed Champollion had given us the final, perfect key to the past. But here is where it gets interesting. Champollion triumphed in a world of ink and paper. But now AI is peering much deeper into those same cracks and realizing the perfect translation we've relied on might be the biggest priestly lie of all. Champollion triumphed, but now AI is peering deeper into those same cracks. Are you ready to see the tailored propaganda the priests tried to hide? AI enters the tomb. For 200 years, we were convinced that Jean-Francois Champollion had finished the job. We looked at the Rosetta Stone as a closed case, a perfect trophy of human intellect sitting behind glass in the British Museum. But here is the thing about human eyes. They get tired. They see what they expect to see, and they definitely can't process 5 million data points at once. That all changed in May 2023 when Google Arts and Culture launched Fabricius. This wasn't just another flashy app. It was a massive, high-powered neural network.
Arts and Culture is now on display virtually.
Google Arts and Culture launched its Portland project today.
Trained on over 500,000 images of ancient scripts. It was designed to do something no human could ever achieve. It started peering into the microscopic cracks and faded ink of history with a level of digital precision that is honestly a little bit unsettling. Now, while Champollion had to rely on a few royal names and a lot of brilliant guessing, Fabricius and similar AI models at MIT started looking at the Rosetta Stone through the lens of pure mathematics. These machines weren't just reading the stone.
Artificial intelligence, cracking codes that have been silent for millennia. The AI did it without the aid of a Rosetta Stone.
They were analyzing the spatial relationships between characters, the specific pressure of the chisel marks, and the statistical probability of a symbol's meaning based on millions of other examples. According to a landmark study published in the journal Nature, these AI systems achieved a staggering 70 to 79% accuracy rate on hieroglyphs they had never even seen before. Think about that for a second. A machine that has never breathed Egyptian air can now look at a jagged fragment of stone and reconstruct a dead language better than many seasoned scholars. But wait, it gets weirder. The AI didn't just stop at the big, famous monuments. Researchers began feeding it ostraka, these tiny, broken bits of pottery that the ancient Egyptians used like scrap paper for everything from grocery lists to tax receipts. Because the AI could process these fragmented messes 40% faster than any human team, it started filling in the gaps of history that we didn't even know were missing. We're talking about thousands of daily lives, voices of the common people that were completely invisible to us for 2 millennia. A 2024 analysis from Cambridge even suggested that the AI was spotting subtle linguistic shifts in the demotic script that suggested different authors were working on the stone at the same time, each with their own hidden agenda. But this isn't about the AI replacing our human geniuses, right? So what is it about? The uncomfortable truth is that even with all that processing power, the machine still hits a ceiling at around 80% accuracy. It refines the work Champollion started. It doesn't just throw it out the window, but it does raise a pretty massive question. Would you bet on cold, calculated machine code outsmarting the literal geniuses who built the very civilizations we're trying to study? It's a strange tension, feeling like we're finally seeing the real Egypt through the eyes of a computer. Here's the thing, though. As the AI kept digging into the Rosetta Stone, it didn't just find a cleaner translation. It started noticing these bizarre inconsistencies between the Greek at the bottom and the hieroglyphs at the top. It wasn't just a matter of a word being off here or there. The machine was flagging entire paragraphs where the tone and the message shifted completely. It was as if the stone were keeping secrets from itself. The patterns were emerging, absolutely, but the scripts were starting to whisper 3 very different stories. And the perfect key was starting to look like a masterful piece of propaganda. Patterns are emerging, but the scripts are starting to whisper different stories. Are you ready to see the tailored lies the AI found hidden in the translation? Scripts that don't match. We always assumed the Rosetta Stone was history's most reliable mirror, a perfect literal reflection where Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs all said exactly the same thing. But when the AI started crunching the data, it realized that this mirror was actually a prism, bending the truth depending on who was standing in front of it. Here's the thing. Historians have known about minor inconsistencies since the days of Champollion, but they usually brush them off as simple translation errors or stylistic choices. But wait, it gets much weirder. When researchers at MIT ran these scripts through their latest neural networks, they found a cross-script variance of 15 to 20%. That is a massive gap. It means that the three sections of the stone aren't just different languages. They're actually different messages entirely. Now, here is where it gets interesting. The AI noticed that the Greek text at the bottom, the language of the ruling elite and the military, is incredibly dry, literal, and administrative. It's written for the people in power who want to know exactly how much grain is being moved and who's paying the taxes. But as you move up into the Demotic script, which was the language of the local Egyptian people and the lower priesthood, the tone shifts completely. For example, where the Greek text might talk about a specific temple ritual, the Demotic version uses symbols for eternal fire and divine protection. It's much more dramatic and far more symbolic. The machine flagged these not as mistakes, but as deliberate tailoring. According to a 2024 analysis from the University of Cambridge, the stone was essentially playing two different roles at the same time. But the real shocker came when the AI looked at the sections regarding priest perks and tax exemptions. In the Greek version, these benefits are mentioned almost in passing, as if they're just another boring detail of the decree. But in the hieroglyphs at the top, the script meant for the gods and the highest temple officials, those same perks are amplified and described as eternal, unchangeable decrees of the heavens. It was a classic power grab hidden in plain sight. The priests who carved this stone were essentially using the king's name to sign their own paychecks, and they were phrasing it in a way that ensured the local population saw it as a spiritual mandate rather than a political favor. Think about that for a second. When you peel back the layers of a document we've trusted for 200 years, how often is history just a polished story designed to keep people in line? It's a bit unsettling to realize that the key to Egypt was actually a masterful piece of spin doctoring. We're not just looking at a translation key anymore. We're looking at a multi-layered propaganda machine.
200 years, the Rosetta Stone was the ultimate key to the ancient world. AI that can now read ancient texts.
According to the research published in Nature, this kind of non-literal decree was actually common in the Ptolemaic era. But we never had the processing power to see exactly how deep the manipulation went until now. The machine's data proves that the priests weren't just translators, they were editors. They were taking the Greek orders from the palace and refining them for the locals to make sure the temple stayed wealthy and the priests stayed untouchable. It raises a huge question. Can you actually spot the ancient spin in plain sight, or do we always need a machine to show us when we're being played? This wasn't just a stone, it was a script for a social hierarchy that survived for centuries. Here is the thing about those discrepancies. They weren't accidents of history. They were the fingerprints of a very specific group of people making sure they came out on top. When you see the way the perks are phrased in the sacred script versus the administrative Greek, those benefits point directly to priests pulling strings in the shadows. And as the AI dug deeper into those strings, it found something even more calculated, a hidden code of tax breaks and exemptions that would make a modern lobbyist blush. Those perks point to priests pulling strings in the shadows. But wait until you see the divine tax breaks the AI uncovered next. Priests' hidden power. Here's the thing about the Rosetta Stone. For 2 centuries, we treated it like a noble document of state, a generous king reaching out to his people. But when the AI finished cross-referencing the Demotic and hieroglyphic layers against the Greek, it revealed something far more calculated. This wasn't just a royal decree, it was a high-stakes hostage negotiation. In 196 BC, Egypt was literally tearing itself apart. There was a massive, violent revolt in Upper Egypt, and the central government in Memphis was on the brink of collapse. Ptolemy V was just a teenager at the time, a boy king caught in a political storm he couldn't control.
his father passed away. I feel like that he would have been somewhere in around 11 or 12 years old.
And right there, in the shadows of the throne, the priesthood saw their absolute perfect opportunity. Now, here is where it gets interesting. The AI scans highlighted over 20 new phrases that we'd previously brushed over or misinterpreted. These weren't just decorative flourishes, they were specific, legally binding tax exemptions for the temples. According to researchers at Ancient Origins, the priests were essentially using the king's desperate need for religious backing to rewrite the tax code in their own favor. While the Greek text makes it sound like the king is being merciful, the Demotic version, the one the local people and temple officials actually read, goes into painstaking detail about how the priests are now exempt from specific duties and grain taxes. It's a classic power play. The priests offered to declare the young king a living god in exchange for a massive, permanent transfer of wealth back into the temples. But wait, it gets much weirder. The AI's analysis suggests that the priests didn't just ask for these benefits. Instead, they included them in the sacred language of the hieroglyphs, making them untouchable. By framing a tax exemption as a divine decree from the heavens, they ensured that no future official would dare to tax the temple lands. It was a masterpiece of social engineering. The teen king got his coronation and a fancy title, but the priests walked away with the keys to the Egyptian economy. Ever notice how the real bosses often hide behind the throne like that? It makes you wonder if power always buries its most significant moves in the fine print of history, waiting for a machine 2,000 years later to finally pull back the curtain. According to a 2023 report in The Guardian, AI is now unlocking secrets of these ancient scripts that prove the holy men of the time were actually the ultimate lobbyists. They took a chaotic political moment and turned it into a century-long financial victory for themselves. They weren't just recording history. They were manufacturing a reality where the temple was the only stable force left in a crumbling empire. And here's the most unsettling part. The fine print the AI found suggests the priests were even controlling how the king's military victories were reported to the public, amping up the religious significance of his battles to make it look like the gods were specifically on the side of the people paying the temple tithes. It's a gritty reminder that the terrifying part isn't just the code itself, but the human nature it reveals. We like to think of ancient civilizations as these mystical alien cultures, but the Rosetta Stone shows us a group of people remarkably like us, struggling for influence, protecting their interests, and using language to manipulate the masses. Does power always bury itself in the fine print? It certainly seems that way. The priests leveraged a vulnerable teen king for their own gain, and they did it so effectively that it took a literal supercomputer to catch them in the act. But as the scans go deeper, they aren't just finding tax breaks anymore. They're finding faint symbols in the margins that seem to be whispering something else entirely. These aren't just administrative notes. They look like warnings. The priests were pulling the strings, but the scans go even deeper, finding faint symbols whispering warnings that nobody was ever supposed to see. Fractured warnings. Here is the thing about the Rosetta Stone that really starts to get under your skin once you look at the 2024 and 2025 high-resolution scans. For centuries, we just assumed the cracks and chips on this massive slab were the result of a rough life of being moved, buried, and eventually dug up by soldiers. But when the AI began mapping the microtopography of those fractures, it found something that honestly feels like it belongs in a sci-fi thriller. Within the microscopic jagged edges of what we thought was just accidental damage, the neural networks flagged recurring Ankh-fire motifs. These aren't just random scratches. They are incredibly small, deliberate carvings of the Ankh symbol, the key of life, being consumed by fire. Think about that for a second. While the main text is busy praising the king and securing tax breaks for the priests, these shadow text motifs hidden in the physical texture of the stone seem to be whispering a completely different story. It is almost as if the craftsmen who carved this stone knew the world they were building was temporary, and they were hiding a second, darker message for anyone who could peer deep enough into the stone's physical scars. According to a fascinating report from Hyperallergic, there is an ongoing and heated debate in the archaeological community about whether these marks are just the result of natural erosion over 2 millennia or if they are the intentional work of a priesthood that sensed their civilization was on the brink of collapse. Now here is where it gets interesting and frankly a bit unsettling. When the AI cross-referenced these Ankh fire motifs with the timing of the Ptolemaic fall, the parallels were staggering. These symbols weren't just decorative, they appeared to be part of a larger doom cycle narrative that the priests were obsessed with. As the rebellion in Upper Egypt grew and the Greek influence began to falter, the priests seemed to be recording a warning about the inevitable end of their era. But wait, it gets weirder. Some researchers suggest that these microscopic carvings were meant to act as a spiritual fail-safe, a way to ensure that the sacred knowledge survived even if the physical temples were burned to the ground. Of course, the uncomfortable truth here is that many traditional scholars are pushing back hard. They argue that we are seeing patterns where none exist, that the AI is simply hallucinating, meaning in the natural weathering of the granodiorite. They point out that the British Museum has maintained the stone in a controlled environment for years, and any newly discovered symbols are likely just a trick of high-contrast digital lighting. But the machine persists. It keeps flagging the same precise geometric shapes in the microfractures, shapes that appear far too consistent to be the work of chance or time. It makes you stop and wonder, though. What if those cracks are screaming a warning we ignored for centuries? What if we were so busy trying to translate the words that we completely missed the message written in the stone's actual wounds? Every legend has its cracks, but if these are deliberate, they suggest a culture that was acutely aware of its own mortality. They were living in a loop of rising and falling dynasties, and they might have been trying to tell us that we are trapped in the same ancient repeat cycles they were.
The Rosetta Stone stars in a new exhibition opening at the British Museum, marking one of the most significant dates in Egyptology.
The idea that history repeats itself is a cliché, but seeing it quantified by cold, calculated code makes it feel much more real. Whether it is intentional or just the beautiful coincidence of decay, these warnings ring a bit too close to our own modern tech-tweaked truths. We think we are so much more advanced than the people who carved this slab, but we are still using the same tools, propaganda, hidden agendas, and linguistic spin to control the narrative of our own time. But as we move from these ancient warnings into the final truth, we have to ask ourselves, are we actually ready to see what the AI revealed about our own future? History's AI mirror. Here is the thing about using a supercomputer to catch ancient liars. The machine looking for the bias might actually be carrying its own. It is a bit of a mind trip when you really think about it. We are celebrating this technology for exposing how a group of Egyptian priests used linguistic black boxes to hide their tax breaks and social control. Yet we are using our own modern black boxes, AI algorithms, to find that truth. We have essentially traded one priesthood for another. While tools like Google's Fabricius are incredible, they aren't some divine source of objective truth. According to a 2023 report from the BBC, these neural networks have a very real ceiling of about 70 to 79% accuracy. That 20% gap is where things get messy, because the machine isn't just reading the stone, it is predicting it based on everything we've already told it. Now, if the training data we give the AI is already flavored by 200 years of our own historical biases, the AI is just going to echo those same tweaks back to us. It is like a digital hall of mirrors. We found that the priests were editing the king's decrees to suit their needs, but we have to ask ourselves if the AI is doing the exact same thing to fit our current scientific expectations. According to researchers at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, who are working on building up Rosetta Stone for the human immune system using nanoparticles, the struggle is always the same. Whether you are translating ancient granite or complex biological signals, the tool you use to decode the message always leaves its own fingerprints on the final result. But wait, we are entering an era where AI isn't just translating the past, it is actually starting to rewrite it. In 2025, tech giants like Alibaba had to release updated ethical guidelines specifically to address AI hallucinations in historical preservation. They found that if a machine is left to fill in the gaps of a fractured stone on its own, it might invent a narrative that never actually existed just to make the data look complete. It is the ultimate irony. We set out to find the authentic Egypt, but we might be accidentally creating a digital version of it that is just as much a piece of propaganda as the original slab. Think about that for a second. If AI can spot the subtle spin of a priest from 2,000 years ago, what kind of spin is it weaving into the information it gives us right now? We live in a world of tech-tweaked truths where algorithms decide what we see, what we believe, and even what we remember. It makes me wonder, will AI rewrite your own history next? Will a scholar in the year 4000 look back at our digital records and need a silicon Rosetta Stone to figure out what a human thought and what was a machine-generated lie? The uncomfortable truth we have to face is that these tools inherit every single one of our human flaws. They are brilliant, yes, but they are also biased, ambitious, and sometimes just plain wrong. The priests of 196 BC leveraged a teenage king to protect their wealth, and today we leverage massive data sets to protect our own sense of certainty. We haven't actually outsmarted the ancients. We've just built a faster way to repeat their patterns. This verdict on the Rosetta Stone forces a total rewrite of everything we thought we knew. We aren't just looking at a translation key anymore. We are looking at a mirror. And that mirror is showing us that the terrifying revelation isn't what the stone says, but the fact that we are still playing the same games of power and perception that were carved into that basalt slab 22 centuries ago. Rewritten past. We spent 200 years treating the Rosetta Stone like a finished puzzle, but AI just proved we've only been looking at the box art. As the dust from the 2023 scans settles, Egyptology is facing a massive overhaul. Those priestly tweaks on the stone weren't isolated incidents. When MIT researchers applied these neural networks to the abuser papyri, fragile administrative documents from an even older era, they found linguistic links suggesting the same narrative control happened for millennia. According to researcher Regina De Paulis, we aren't just looking at damaged artifacts, we're looking at a multi-generational effort to shape how we perceive the past. There are over 100,000 ancient Egyptian texts in museum basements, most translated only once. Many were decoded using the perfect mirror assumption that the Rosetta Stone provided in the 19th century. But if AI is right about that 15% variance, we've been reading a polished history. We are standing on the edge of a data flood where every deed, tomb prayer, and tax receipt needs a digital second opinion. But it gets deeper than rereading text. According to Smithsonian Magazine, scientists are using AI for 3D restorations of stones once considered lost causes. They're taking jagged fragments and using predictive modeling to fill in missing hieroglyphs with impossible accuracy. It's like the past is being physically rebuilt, but this triumph brings a heavy dose of dread. If a machine can find secrets hidden from the world's greatest geniuses, what does that say about our other settled facts? It makes you wonder how much of what you learned in school gets erased tomorrow. History isn't unchangeable. Even stone can be edited and manipulated. Once we turn machines loose on those 100,000 texts, human civilization is going to look a lot different than the story we've told ourselves. The Rosetta Stone is no longer just a key. It's a digital mirror reflecting our own struggle with propaganda. We haven't reached the end of the story. We've just realized we were reading the wrong version of the first chapter. The Rosetta Stone was never just a translation key. It was the first piece of fake news ever to go viral across history. AI finally pulled back the curtain on the priest's 2,200-year-old psyop, and it's a warning that rings all too true in our digital age. What do you think? Is history an elite code or a neutral record?